Shanks
Okay.
is a cloud guy.
Oh, goody. So, well, without further ado, and unless I press the pause, I'm going to say this is Linda Walls, and this is Mixed Bag at Belmont Village Story Swap, third Monday. This is February 15, 2021. I'm so glad to be able to say 21. It feels like I just attained an age or a new era. And we all have. So let's
Plus
see.
a report card. Not many of those in there.
Yeah, I am. I had paused the recording. I didn't think I'd ever see the adjective rival in front of the word storyteller, but the title of this very short story is Rival Storytellers. And these two tellers were at the same dinner and at the same table and could hear each other talking when one of the storytellers said, I can tell you that I was traveling, and in my travels, I was passed by a bird that was a bird so large you can't imagine it. A bird so large that it took over an hour just to fly past me. And all the people at the table's eyes got wide and their ears cocked up, and they couldn't imagine this bird. And he was firm with this, but immediately begins to speak the other storyteller that I mentioned, who is seated at the same table, who said, I have traveled also, I have traveled widely. And in my travels, what I saw was a tree so big that it took half a day just to walk past the tree. And when the other story heard this, the other storyteller said, that cannot be. The world is a big place, and it has big things. Mountains, for example. But trees, that big, I can't believe it. At which point the second storyteller chimes in. Well, it is so. I'm telling you the truth, and it must be the truth, for if it wasn't the truth, how ever would the bird that you saw that was so big ever have a place to rest or roost? Has anyone heard that
No.
or its origins? I meant to look it up.
That's fun. That's fun.
Good one.
Good one.
So I must pause to ask, Beth. We did a little bit of geography before you came, Beth, and just to bring you up to speed, I think you know that Renu is here from Chennai, India.
That's wonderful.
And Anne and Terry know that. I think I told them that in an email. But Beth, are you still far away too?
I'm just in Sebastopol.
Oh.
I'm actually
that's what
Vicky, but I didn't know that you were all meeting, and finally I got wise to the Zoom thing that we're storytelling. I'm missing the Bay Area Storytelling Festival so much that I kind of went in to myself. But we have a mixed bag storytelling up here, not mixed bag, but the story swap that's with the Santa Rosa group. So I found them, and then I found you, and then I paid for my dues, and I'm going, yay.
That's wonderful.
But I'm just here to be a participant, and I unfortunately have to leave a little bit after 8 for another thing. So I'm so glad to see you all. It's been
Beth, it's wonderful to
so
see you.
long. I'm so glad to hear about Pauline and Martha being in Oakland and being okay.
Well, they are probably spitting nickels. They're tied up as they are, but we all are tied up. But
yes,
we're not in our late 80s, 90s. I mean, I don't remember how many years they have to count, but they need both hands to count times several. And they are happy and unhappy, and I can't quite tell which one is always most present. And I wish there's a third storyteller. Anne knows who I'm going to bring up, Kate Frankel, who is in the same situation,
Yes.
not in her original home. But I have not spoken to Kate for 2 months. Anyway, I'm hoping all is well and that I have a report for you. I keep saying that, but I do sincerely hope it. So moving along.
I thought I was ready. That's bad. I'm sorry. When I was very small, we lived in Colorado Springs. It was a very, very small town. And my parents finally bought a house over off of Vermejo Street. We had a steep, steep hill. And then up behind us on another steep hill, there were little farms, was a big farms, and I called them, the Collin tribes lived in it. They had about 6 kids. Well, right across from them was a big field, and we would gather out there at night. I must have been 5 or 6, and there 5 or 6 children and my brother. And we knew that this horrible, horrible thing lived in that field because there was trash all over and the grass was all chomped down, but there was a diagonal wedged across it. And we used to run across it to go to school. We never would stop there. So it's dusk, and we're out there and we sing, Yanny, 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 you can't catch us. And then we just run like just everything to get across to the other side. I was long and skinny, so I usually got there first. So we're sitting on the other side over by the street, and the alley was over there. And we sang it again, Yanny, 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 you can't catch us. And we stream across, and I got caught on my legs, and I fell, and my legs were hurting me, and I was screaming and hollering because I knew this beast was going to get me, was going to kill me, I was going to suffocate, and I was suffocating on the dust. And I looked up, and there was this lovely glow. It was a woman, and she was glowing, and I said, that's not my mom. She usually helps me. That's not my guardian angel. There's no wings. It's not a fairy. There's no wings either. And I kept looking at her and looking at her, and finally I just got up. I felt comfortable. I felt at peace. And I walked through the field, and my friends were over there just horrified. And they looked at me, and, tears were all marked, and my knees were all bloody. My blood was running out, and that scared me because I thought I might leak all over. And so they said, what was it? And I said, oh, I knew they wouldn't understand. And I said, oh, I don't know. I just felt better. I said, but there's no monster in there. And my little brother, I was walking down now because I was kind of mad at everybody and at myself. And my little brother said, well, Berta, what was there? And I said, oh, you won't believe me. There was this woman there, really beautiful woman. And he looked at me like, oh yeah, tell me more. And I said, that's all I can tell you. She was dressed in yellow, and she's beautiful, and she was friendly. And so for years I thought she was the grain goddess. But I went to tell stories at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, and we were studying the myths. So I was studying this one horrible myth, and the demon was in control. It was this horrible demon, and he was Maisha, and he was evil, and he'd come from the Netherlands up, and he was just destroying everything. Well, I kept reading that, and finally this voice came. Oh, I'm Durga, it said. I'm the one who came to visit you in the field. You know how your imaginations go. I just loved it because after all those years, I had found Durga. And next week, I've got the tale all written out, and I've told it many, many times. And the kids really loved it. And she's the sovereign goddess that helped overrule the English from India. And she was celebrated to the whole state for a long time. Myrna knows about all that. But I'm not quite ready to tell the tale. It's very powerful. Just next time I'll tell the rest of it.
Ready.
So I had the very good fortune of having 4 uncles in my life as I was growing up. And I loved each one of them dearly, and each one of them had a major influence on me as I was growing up, and not the least of which was my Uncle Neil. This story comes from a letter that I wrote to his wife, my Aunt Lola, the day after he passed away. It was February 4th, 1995. Dearest Lola, yesterday I drove from Tucson, Arizona to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Over 400 miles of almost nothing but barren desert, the horizon broken only by occasional renegade outcroppings of rocks and boulder-sized, barn-sized boulders, etched against a crystal clear blue sky. The road was clear ahead of me. I had a mellow tape on the deck, might have been Fleetwood Mac or somebody like that. And it was, of course, a good time for reflection about my Uncle Neil. My memories of him came flooding back to me, but driving as I was at that moment triggered a special one. It was the first occasion when we were first able to bond together as nephew and uncle, mano a mano, if you will. I was probably 10 years old and very impressionable. And I was given permission and the opportunity of driving with him on a trip from Sanibel Island, Florida, to Black Mountain, North Carolina. Driving with him in his pride and joy, his brand new bright green Hudson Hornet. Now, at that time, I was very into superheroes, Superman and so forth, but one of my favorites on the radio was the Green Hornet. And I was sure that this car had come right from the Green Hornet to my uncle. So with my mom and dad in their car and Uncle Neil and I and his new Hudson, we left the island about the same time. And then we were soon heading northeast toward Jacksonville, Florida. And I watched the speedometer climb as he shifted expertly through all the 3 gears. And then he dropped it into a 4th gear, one I'd never ever seen on any car my parents owned. And our speed jumped way up right away. We were soon cruising along at 70 miles an hour. I don't think my uncle was worried about speeding tickets. I think he was the original Smokey and the Bandit kind of guy. But he was so, enamored with this car, and we were whizzing along in the asphalt highway, and the car seemed to hum as speed increased. I saw that my parents' car kept falling further and further behind until soon it just disappeared in the side view mirror. And I was keenly aware of the joy and pleasure that my Uncle Neil was having at experiencing that moment as he was showing off his pride and joy car to his young wide-eyed nephew. This was a special automobile that he owned. It was at that time he made clear it was the very fastest form of automobile transportation known on the planet. And he took great care to educate me all about it and all its facets, the races it had won and so forth. And I was fascinated by all the knobs and the buttons on the dial, on the dashboard there. And so as he was talking about this car, I saw this knob up on the dash and it had a red dot in the middle of it. I was naturally kind of attracted to that. So I reached out and I started to grab it and stop! My Uncle Neil shouted, "Don't touch that knob, ever!" I withdrew my hand and then sat there chastened, thoroughly convinced that I might have done something or was going to do something that might have ruined the engine on his Pride Hornet or thrown us careening off the ditch off the road into these ditches filled with alligators and water moccasins. But he let me sit there uncomfortably for a long time. And then he looked at me with a total deadpan face. And in very serious and somber tones, he said, "We don't have flight clearance from the tower. We're only cleared for road travel on this trip. If you pull that knob, airfoils extend from the chassis and this car transformed into what the FAA classifies as an aeroplane. When the foils extend, we would lift off the ground approximately 10 to 12 feet. Our speed would reach the top of the speedometer. You see the mark there. You see 140 miles per hour. We'd arrive in Black Mountain long before your mother and father ever get out of the state of Florida." I thought about that for a long moment. And I must have looked at him somewhat dubiously because he added, "You don't think I'd just drive any car, do you, Terry? That I'd be content with a car just because it has the most powerful engine ever built? The first car with overdrive, with aerodynamic design. This isn't just an automobile, Terry. This is a Hudson Hornet. And Hornets fly, don't they?" He was so adamant and impassioned in his argument with my skepticism. My skepticism just went away, and I no longer doubted that indeed cars could fly. Well, I think it was a strategy on his part. It was brilliant because there was no chance of my reverting to the sort of pesky little kid saying, "When are we going to get there, Uncle Neil?" And the long trip from Florida to North Carolina just made shorter, I'm sure, for both of us by my constant fascination with that red knob and the idea that at any moment we could leave the ground and soar above all the ordinary and mundane traffic below. The hours and miles literally flew by. Now, I have another memory about that car and my Uncle Neil. When I was about 12 years old, he allowed me to drive that car around the grounds of my great aunt Lil's estate in Black Mountain, North Carolina. I toured the many twisting and gravel roads of her 80-acre property alone, by myself, feet barely able to touch the pedals and head barely above the dash. My very first automobile solo. And I did it with great care, precision, and pride, never taking it out of second gear. Lord, that would be too fast. And even though there was rarely any traffic on those private roads, I always came to a full, cautious stop at every intersection. I was the pilot, solely in command of my car/aircraft. And I'm pretty sure I know what you're all thinking about right now. And I admit that I was very sorely tempted, but I never once touched that red knob. Even today, I often wonder what that red knob actually did. Thank you. Thank you very much.
This story is something that I think about when I'm cooking, and as a child, I would be given the job of watching my mother of 7 children cook, and not really, it was faster for her to cook than it was for her to show us how to help. But I helped in a way that would be to watch the long sliced horizontally loaves of San Francisco sourdough French bread. We lived in Oakland, but we could buy French bread at the local Safeway. And she would slice it, as I said, horizontally, and then put both halves crust side down in the broiler beneath the stove, beneath the oven. And my job was to watch it because she was very, very busy boiling water for noodles and stirring tomato sauce to put on top of the noodles and preparing a salad. And despite the fact that I had, at that time, I had my twin brother, but I didn't have my other 5 siblings yet. But she had enough of us, and so she was busy. And it was the hardest thing for me to not get distracted. And I didn't realize that I was there because I was not supposed to be distracted. But I burned many of those loaves of bread, which is, I'm sad to say. And I bring this up because this story, as I said, some of you have heard it, but the first 2 sentences make me think about the verb when people start talking about cooking. The verbs are not always positive, but in this story, the title of this story has suddenly escaped me. In this story, it begins with a man. Once there was a man who loved to cook, and he loved to serve. He would come out of the kitchen bearing plates laden with food, and heavy as they may have been, he loved it. He would be able to work all day long preparing and serving food from morning until night. But one day, a highway was put in And it meant that all of the travelers who would stop by his restaurant no longer did. They went from home to their destination, and he lacked customers for this very reason. All he had to do, without being able to help people and serve people and do what he loved, was to polish his tables and his plates and dishes. But it brought no money, and he became very poor. One day, though, a man walked into his restaurant, and he was a stranger wearing old, worn clothing, but he had a gentle, unusual manner about him. And he told the man that he was unable to pay for food. But the man asked him to please take a seat. I would like to serve you a meal, even though you don't have money to pay me. And the man did take a seat, and the food was prepared and brought out, and it was as abundant and as worthy of a king. And that was placed before our stranger. Well, of course, the stranger loved this food, and he ate up all of this food. But by the end of the time has passed now, and the stranger is looking up at the man, and he's saying, again, I cannot pay you with money, but I would like to give you something. And so the stranger reached for one of the paper napkins, and he put it on the table, and he unfolded it and refolded it and folded it over many times. And when he was done folding it, he had created a bird. And so he took this bird and he handed it to the man. And he said, I want you to have this bird, for this is a special bird. All you need to do is to clap your hands, and this bird will dance for you. Oh, the man was delighted. He thanked the stranger profusely, who stood up and left. But before leaving, he said to the man, I am glad to give it to you, and you may keep it for a time, for as long as you need it. Well, the man was beyond happy because it was true. People started to hear about the bird and come to see the bird, and it was exactly as he had been told. He merely needed to clap his hands, and the bird would perk up, fly down from the shelf, stand on the floor, and begin to dance. The man was able to start doing what he had to stop doing before. And he did it daily because that's how quickly the word traveled. His whole reason for being there was underlined by being able to have a constant flow of people and food and hellos and stories and thank yous and goodbyes. He loved the goodbyes as much as the hellos. He didn't feel starved that there wouldn't be another one the next day. And this went on for days, for weeks, for months. And then a man came into the restaurant wearing old, tattered clothes with a gentle, unusual manner. But he didn't sit down. He stood at the door, and from his rear pocket, the man took a flute and brought the flute up to his lips, and he began to play a tune. And when this happened, the bird not only came down from its shelf and stood on the floor and looked ready to dance, but once beginning to dance, danced as it had never danced in front of this restaurant owner before. Who knows? Maybe it had never danced like this before ever. But now I tell you a part where you might think that it was because of the flute. I do. Because once the bird was done dancing, people clapped. And then the man who had come through the door put one leg over the back of the bird, and on top of the bird, the two of them flew outside of the restaurant up into the sky and couldn't be seen anymore. And truly were never seen by those people ever again. But the people didn't stop coming to the restaurant. The owner didn't stop making food. They kept doing what they'd been doing these many months, which was enjoying each other's company deliberately and beautifully and gratefully. And since then, the bird nor the man has ever been seen again. If I could think of the title of this story, I would tell you. Molly Garrett Bang wrote it. Molly Barrett Bang, B-A-N-G. And I'll think of it. Maybe after Renu tells the story, I'll be able to remember.
Before I start my story, I just wanted to tell all of you one thing. If all of you love to listen to stories, then there's something called the Chennai Storytelling Festival that's going on right now. It happens only over the weekends, and the first 2 weekends are already up, but there is another one happening on the 20th and 21st, and then the 27th and 28th of February. So if you would like to listen to the stories, it's happening from Saturday evening onwards, right through midnight, right through the night, up to about Sunday evening around 10 o'clock is when it stops. So if you are interested, then I can put you on to Eric Miller. Eric Miller is an American who settled down in Chennai, and he organizes this festival every single year. And this time it went online simply because of the pandemic. And people all over the world have been telling stories, there have been workshops, and everything is free. So if any of you are interested, then I can pass on the email address to you, and you could perhaps write to him and he will share the Zoom link with you. So I just wanted to give you this information.
Renu, thank you. I wrote down Eric Miller. Is that correct?
Yes.
What are my search words? Or do you?
No, I can share the email ID with you. All you have to do is write an email to him, and he will send you the Zoom link.
Oh, very good.
I will just write it down in the chat as soon as I finish my story.
Excellent.
And if any one of you is interested, please write to him and you'll be invited.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. And it's such a pleasure to be with all of you. I've enjoyed the stories. I love them because I love listening as much as I like telling. And I think these stories were absolutely wonderful. Each one of your stories was very touching. And I think Terry's story was so enjoyable because I was just imagining him as a little boy listening to his uncle telling him this story. And what a wonderful experience that must have been, and what a wonderful story to tell. I'm sure his grandchildren would love that story. So, you know, everything that you expressed, Linda, after he had shared the story was exactly what was running through my mind. So I think that is exactly what I wanted to express to him as well. And I love the story that you said. Yes, there's no title, but I'm sure any storyteller can devise a title for that story. And it's a beautiful, beautiful story. So thank you for sharing. And here goes my story. And my story is called The Three Dolls. I've heard many, many versions of it. And the last version I heard, I was not particularly happy with the way it went. So I've added my changes to it, and now it's become mine. So here goes the story. Ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum-dum. There's a story here, there's a story there, there's a story everywhere. A story for me, a story for you, and a story for everyone. Listen to the story, share the story, pass the story on. Ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum-dum. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen who ruled over a vast kingdom. They loved each other very much, and they ruled the kingdom wisely and well. The kingdom prospered, and the people were very happy. Now, there's one thing that the queen loved as much as she loved the king, and that was to solve puzzles and riddles. She absolutely loved to spend time solving puzzles. In fact, she had a group of people in the palace who made new puzzles for her every single day. Sometimes she would spend 6 to 8 hours solving a puzzle, and sometimes she would take 12 hours to solve it. And the longer the puzzle lasted, the happier she was. Now, there came a time when there was no puzzle that she couldn't solve within 2 hours, perhaps, and some of them she could solve within 15 minutes. And then there came a time when every single puzzle was no longer challenging enough. And so she sent out a royal proclamation. Anyone who could come up with a puzzle that was really challenging, which would perhaps give her about 6 hours of entertainment, they would be rewarded richly. And of course, the news spread. There were long lines of people standing in front of the palace, waiting to be admitted before the queen. Every one of them presented her with a puzzle, but none of them lasted long enough. The ones who took her about 2 hours to solve, these people were rewarded with a few gold coins. But now the queen was in a dilemma. How could she keep herself challenged? And as the days went on and she didn't have any more puzzles or riddles to solve, the queen took to her bed and she refused to get up. Now the king was very upset because he was unhappy. He didn't like ruling the kingdom without her. And he had no idea what he had to do. First, he called for his ministers, he called for his wise men, but nobody had a clue what to do. And then one day, a huge parcel arrived. He opened the box. There were 3 boxes inside. He took out the first one. And when he opened it, there was a wooden doll which looked exactly like the queen. He opened the second one, and this was a replica of the first one. And when he opened the last one, this was exactly like the first 2. And then there was a little note inside which said, these 3 dolls look the same, but each of them is different. And if you can solve this puzzle, the queen will get better. Now the king was not good at puzzles, but this didn't seem very difficult. So he looked at the first doll. He looked at it from top to bottom, from bottom to top, from side to side. He turned it all around. And then he picked up the second one. He did the same thing. Then the third one. But every one of them looked exactly the same. He couldn't spot a single difference. And so now he was wondering what to do. So he called out for his wise man. The wise man came and stroked his beard and said, well, this doesn't look very difficult for me. And he did the same thing that the king had done. He picked up the first doll and looked at it from here to there, from top to bottom, bottom to top. He placed it on a table and walked right around it. And then he did that same thing with the second and third one. But he too was confused. And so he left the palace. The next one to say that he could solve it was the minister. Now this minister was famous for talking so much. He never ever listened to anybody. He was very confident he could solve the issue. So he walked up to the dolls and he did the very same thing. But he too had to admit defeat. Now the king was broken up with grief. He had no idea what to do. And then one day, the palace guard came in and said, Your Majesty, there's a young woman who wants to see you. Now the king was desperate. So he asked for the young woman to be brought in. And when the young woman walked in, she bowed low before the king and said, Your Majesty, I think I can solve this puzzle. And he looked at her and said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I am a storyteller. I'm a story gatherer, and I'm a traveler. You can call me anything you wish." And so he showed her the dolls. And she looked at them. And she said, "I would like thin wires." So thin wires were presented to her. And she picked up the first one. And she put it through the ear of the first doll. And though she pushed it and pushed it, it refused to come out. And then she said, "This is the wise man. He keeps all his knowledge to himself. He doesn't share it." Then she picked up the second doll. And as soon as she put the string in, it came out to the other side. And she said, "This is your minister. All he does is talk. And whatever he hears passes from the first ear to the second, out to the second." And then she picked up the third doll. And once again, she put the wire in. It went into the ear. And then she continued working with it. It twisted and turned. And finally, it came out of the mouth. And she said, "This is the storyteller." Because a storyteller listens to a story. She takes time to absorb it, to digest it. And then she shares it, adding her own twists and turns to the story. And she believes that a story is meant to be shared. And as soon as she shares the story, she tells the people who are listening, "Take the story forward, pass it on." And the king was amazed. And he said, "But the queen is still in bed." And she said, "Give me 3 weeks with your queen. I do not want to be disturbed." And so the king took her to the queen's bedchamber. And the storyteller stayed shut up inside the chamber for 3 long weeks. And at the end of the 3rd week, the king was summoned. And there was the queen sitting up in bed, laughing and smiling. Her cheeks were rosy once again, and she seemed full of life. And the king turned to the storyteller and said, "What kind of magic have you done?" And she said, "It was no magic, Your Majesty. The first week, your wife lay in bed with her eyes closed. And I told her many, many stories of possession, of renunciation. And then tears came out of her eyes. And the second week, when her eyes were open, I told her many stories of happiness and joy. And she started to laugh. And the 3rd week, we spent time listening and sharing stories. And I think now she's ready to live again." And the king was amazed and happy. And he said, "Thank you, thank you. What can I give you in return? What would you like?" And the storyteller said, "I don't want anything in return. Stories cannot be bought. They can only be shared." And the queen, she said, "No, I want the storyteller to live here with me. I want more stories." And the storyteller turned to her and said, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I'm a storyteller. I'm a story gatherer. And I'm a traveler. And I need to travel. I have more stories to gather. And I have more stories to share. So please, I need to leave." And the king turned to her and said, "Could I please give you a few pieces of gold?" And she said, "No, just give me 2 pieces of silver, which will help me to get through to the next village or kingdom, where I can gather more stories and share them too." And so the king and the queen agreed. And the storyteller said, "Now you have lots and lots of stories to share, and you can keep sharing them. And I'm sure all the people in this kingdom have lots of stories too, and you can keep the stories going." And the king and the queen were amazed, and the storyteller left. And I'm sure she's continuing to gather stories and sharing them. Stories that can give joy, stories that can heal, and stories that can keep the world going. Thank you. Ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. A story here and a story there, a story everywhere. A story for me and a story for you and a story for everyone. Listen to the story, share the story, pass the story on. Ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum, ta-da-dee-dum-dum-dum. I hope you enjoyed the story. Thank you.
Oh my, I enjoyed that story immensely.
Brava, brava.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Do you remember where you found it?
Yes, actually, there are many, many versions of the story. There's one in our own, not mythology, but there are a series of stories called Akbar and Birbal. And Birbal is a trickster, and he is one of Akbar's most favorite ministers. This actually happened. It's there in our history. Akbar was one of the Muslim emperors who ruled over the country. And Birbal was supposed to be his most trusted and very clever minister. And so this story, actually, the king is presented with the three dolls, and he's asked to solve the mystery behind the dolls. And I think Birbal hands over these dolls to his daughter, and then she's the one who tells him the difference between each dolls. But I'm not very sure. I don't remember the story clearly. I read it many, many years ago. And then this story was shared about a couple of months ago by another storyteller. And her story version was very different. She said that the king loved the queen very much and she was beautiful. And he looked at her every single day and he felt she was very lucky for him. And he asked her to sit at the palace balcony and let the people of the kingdom look at her. And every day she had to sit for about 15 minutes. And then the people came and had a look, and they felt that they were prospering because of her luck, the luck that she passed on to them. And then she falls sick probably because she doesn't like sitting out in the balcony anymore. And the king is worried, and that's when this parcel arrives. And he actually, in her story, she said he calls for the wise man, and then he calls for a fool. And I don't believe that there are any people who can be called fools. I don't believe in fools. And I don't believe in those kind of labels that we attach to people. So I changed it to the minister. And then she also said that the third person, of course, is a storyteller. But she said, I went as a storyteller. So she included herself in the story. And I thought that didn't gel with me either. And the fact that, the woman is beautiful and she sits, the king actually forces her to sit out in the balcony. I don't believe in that kind of stuff, because I feel that as it is, women are always described as beautiful. They're never actually described by the strength of their intelligence or their sharpness of wit. So I changed the story completely because I felt that the woman is equally important as the man. And I said the king and the queen rule the kingdom together. So it's not always the king who rules the kingdom. The queen also can rule the kingdom. So I'm actually a feminist, and I also believe I love animals. So most of my stories revolve around animals, nature, about gender equity, and these are the kind of stories that appeal to me. And there are stories that I like, and I change them around a bit. I think all storytellers do that. There are certain stories that attract us, and there are certain elements that we don't like. So I remove those elements, and I tell the story that I would like to tell. So this is how I came about the story. And this is one of my favorite stories. And I think every time I've shared it, people have liked it. And every time I share it, I just share it without a pre-dialogue in my head. So sometimes the dialogue varies. And so I'm glad that all of you liked it.
Renu, it's the most edifying of stories because it turns on its head it being stories mustn't be kept within. It makes it a more positive statement about, instead of swallowing stories or hiding stories or putting them in some sort of there are many stories about stories, you know that. But this story about stories is the half of the glass that is full. Thank you for it. Oh my.
My pleasure.
So how could I not remember to...
Okay, well, I was told I visited my Uncle Lou when I was 3 years old, but I don't remember it at all. And then my dad got transferred to the Philippines for 2 years. And so I didn't see any of my relatives except for my immediate family. So the first time I remember visiting him, or actually him visiting us, seeing my Uncle Lou, was when I was about almost 7 years old. And he didn't like to fly in airplanes. Well, he was from northern Indiana, a little town called Warsaw, which is in Kosciuszko County, which is about 150 miles east of Chicago. So I came, and so he came on the train. And so we went down to the train station, and there I met my Uncle Lou. So he came, and he and his wife stayed with us for a few days. And do you know what he did? He taught me how to play poker. Only trouble is he let me win every time. And he also taught me how to arm wrestle. And he also let me win. So I had an overestimation of my strength as a 7-year-old. But that's all right. I learned later on. So what the sad thing is that he really liked children, and children liked him. But he and his wife, they had one daughter who was named Lillian Jean. And way back when cars were rare on the road, she'd gotten hit by a car and killed when she was only 12 years old. So he treated all his nieces and nephews in a very special manner because of his loss. And his wife was a little more, Frida, she was a little more acrid because I think she was still felt the loss. This is why couldn't Lillian Jean have lived? I think she felt that her whole life. But she was a wonderful woman too. She made the most wonderful pies. So we had a wonderful trip. We went, well, my parents and I lived in Salt Lake City. So we went up the canyon, we went to the copper mine, we showed him around. And then we went back to the train station and showed him off, and he rode the train back to Indiana. And then a few years later, my dad, his whole family was Indiana, and he worked in Salt Lake City. So we drove to Indiana every 2 or 3 years. And then we saw sights along the way, which was really a fun trip. America has a lot of wonderful sights to see, like Tom Sawyer's Cave and all sorts of things like that. So the next time I saw him was about 2 or 3 years later. And we had a pet hamster at home by this time. I think I was around 12. And the hamster was had to be, well, for while we were gone. The hamster didn't come with us, but it stayed at the neighbor's house. So it took us several days, and we got to Indiana, and I got to stay on their closed in porch of their house. And so I slept. And then in the backyard, what my uncle did for a living, he was I don't know the exact word, but he was a skilled tradesman. He made furniture for a living. So he made desks and all sorts of things. And so he also had a lathe that you turn it around, and so you get candlesticks and wooden poles for stairways and stuff. And I don't know the correct terms, but you know what I mean. And so he would make these things, and I watched him make candlesticks and these things that are circular, and the thing would go around. And then I kept he gave me a couple huge bags of these things for my hamster's bedding. So I got to take that back to my hamster. So he influenced my hamster too. Of course, they don't live very long. And so we had a wonderful time, and he was really fun to be with. But also he also had, since they didn't have kids, they had a bunch of cats. And they also had they lived on the edge of town. It wasn't part of the town. It is now, but it wasn't back then. And they had a corner store, this is because of the rain. And they had a cistern under their house. And so there's the water in the bathroom we couldn't drink, but we could drink the water in the kitchen because it was plumbed differently. I don't know if they do that anymore to houses, but back it was an 100-year-old house. So we went so we went and under the house you could go in, and there was the cistern, and since and he said oh the cat can't let the cats down in the basement anymore because they get too curious for the cistern, and he says the cats get too curious, and you know what happens to them then. So I thought, so he told me about the curiosity of cats. So I learned not to be too curious. Maybe I'd asked him a lot of why questions before that, I'm not sure, but curiosity killed the cat, because it got too close to the water, and he said he had to fish a couple out, but I don't know if that's really true or not. But so I learned I learned a lot of wise things from his sayings, and so we had fun time in Indiana. We saw the sights, and then we went back, and then there was some lakes and stuff because it's northern Indiana, close to the northern state. And so we went back to Utah. Then 3 or 4 years later, we went back and we stayed at his house again, and we had a good time. And we liked to sew together. And he also took me on, and so that time, my dad and I and my Uncle Lou, we went out, and he liked to see, they grew up on a farm. So and my uncle collected columbines, or we went to the Columbine Museum, which was a machine that helped in the harvest way back before there were tractors. So you'd put the grains through, and then it would come out. So I went to this Columbine, and I had a wonderful time. We went to, and we saw a place where this guy had made miniature columbines. So it was a perfect place for collectors of columbines. And I had a wonderful, wonderful time. But when we got home, my mother said, "Why did you let her get so dirty?" And so I thought, oh, well. So there we go. I got too dirty out with the guys, I guess, with my dad and my uncle. And my dad was the youngest one in the family. And he was very lucky because they had lived, in Indiana, everyone got to go to school through 8th grade. They had county schools. When they were built, it was made how the land was divided up while people were homesteading it from the very beginning. I don't know if you learned that in school, but we did. And so, but in 8th grade, you had to be bused if you didn't. Now they have buses, but back then they didn't have buses. So a lot of farmers' kids only got to go to 8th grade, and they didn't get to go any further. But so my uncle only went to 8th grade. But my dad was the youngest, and what happened? My grandfather passed away young of a heart attack, and so they sold the farm and moved to town, where my grandmother could work, do sewing and ironing for people and cleaning house, and so my dad got to finish high school, because they never could so my dad was the only, because he was the youngest, he was the only one of his family that could finish high school. And it was just a circumstance. And then he got a scholarship to college, and then he got his PhD. I mean, he kept going. He liked school, but my uncle didn't, but he was very happy. And and then we went away again, and then we went back. I went back later on, and he was an older man, and so he'd given up his shop and mostly retired, and auctioned off some of his columbines, but he was still woodworking, and he had this machine, and he made picture frames for people. And so and apparently his picture frames were famous in the area, so everyone wanted a picture frame. And he says, I don't know, these sell really good, and the more weevil holes in the wood, the more I can charge for the picture frame. So that was really fun too. So that was the influence of my uncle on me.
Oh my gosh, Colleen, your family, the farms, the equipment, the Kirk and I got to visit farms in Alberta 3 years ago, and they had tractors, but they called them combines.
Yeah, combines. Yeah, or we call them combine. I think they shortened it actually. So, but actually, since my uncle teased me, and then my dad and all their friends teased me, I got to work. But then I would sort of maybe encourage some people to tease me when I got out to Berkeley, and the older women would get so upset that I was getting abused. But it was my culture. So this is a cultural clash. That's what my story was. And I still enjoy being teased to this day, and you can do it, and anyone here can do it, and that's fine with me. Don't let anyone else stop you.
I love the candor. Oh my gosh. Jazz hands for Colleen. Is it Uncle Lou, L-O-U?
What?
Uncle Lou, L-O-U?
L.
Oh, maybe L-E-W.
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 For Lewis, it was Lewis Baylor. Lewis Baylor Folly, yes. L-E-W-I-S. Uncle Lou is short for Lewis.
Thank you for that trip. That was a long trip, but I was glad to be on it.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to go so long.
Oh my gosh.
Colleen, they tease all the time, and her sons tease.
Well, someone I worked with, I think his grandfather was from the Midwest, and he teased me, but the other ladies from New York would get so mad at him, but they would do it behind my back. So I still feel guilty for that. But it was my fault because I look like the tease. I mean, it was part of my culture. It's not part of theirs.
Right. It's interesting.
It is interesting. In America, there's a lot of different cultures.
Yes.
So, thank you, Linda. I'll be quiet.
Oh my gosh, Colleen, I am so glad that you told us that. Now, of course, I want to be bothering the other storytellers to see if there's a chance that we could get others to tell who haven't. But I'm writing to Renu because her sound is troubling her.
No, now I can hear you, Linda.
Oh, very good.
I don't know. I think my network was weak. The bandwidth was weak, I think.
Maybe, but is it just coincidental that you were able to hear us within less than 5 seconds of me asking you to, as the host, I was prompted to ask you to unmute. Do you think that's just coincidental?
I don't know. Yeah, probably.
I'm so techie, not.
No, that's okay.
But I don't know, how are we doing on time? We're fine on time, and if Vicky or Beth or John have changed them, or Anne have changed your minds, it would be wonderful.
I thank you, but I have
stuff stored down there. So she told us to go in the basement. It's just about dark to get these apples and bring them up. Mrs. Mann, the lady next door would give them apples and peaches and blah, blah, blah. So we went down the stairs and we got down there and the lights went off and all of a sudden this cat just howled, this horrible howl. And we came running upstairs and there was my uncle laughing. You know, we were the butt of this horrible joke, but it was funny, you know. He wasn't bullying us. He just wanted to scare these little kids. He was only 10 years older than we were. And it was just funny, you know, and we cried for a while, and then we laughed and laughed. So that's teasing, the way I see it.
That's very good, because what it's reminding me, Terry, is like based on what you were talking about and how your uncles were toward you, and how I was thinking then about how their uncles were toward them. Bobby has just done that with other rites of initiation, which is being
Yes.
scared and being teased and
Yeah.
restate the obvious.
I haven't,
That's true.
I haven't had the privilege of getting hold of the letters that the brothers, the four brothers in the family, wrote to each other, but I can tell by the way they reacted with each other when we were together as a family that there was a lot of teasing and joking and stretching of tall tales going on between all of them as well. So they got teasing in the family.
Tall
My
tales.
husband thought it was horrible because he's from Berkeley. You know, they're sober and they're straight, and they don't.
I know.
It's just so he never did get it. And yeah. So, and my mother and my father. Anyway, I don't tease. It's not social here. It's you have to have a certain knack about it, and I just don't have that knack. It just.
Bobby's making me think that it's not a hard to attain knack if practiced.
No, it's not.
It
It's
must
just
be learned well, surely, or sensitively, or
Just
intelligently.
finding the right buttons, Bobby. You got to just
Yeah.
find the right buttons to press.
exactly.
I
Oh,
think it's hard to carry off really good teasing
Yeah,
with a stranger. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to know the person you're teasing.
Yes.
Family
yeah,
is
I think so
perfect
too.
container, but you know, I think teasing, trying to tease somebody in any other context very often will be seen as being
Rude.
well, not only rude, but you know,
Aggressive.
yeah, aggressive or putting down.
Putting down. Yeah,
There's
good.
so much concern these days about, you know,
Political correctness.
making people of other languages or cultures, you know, that gets their back up because they feel like they're being put down. So I think you should keep the teasing in the family.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, next time I see you, I might tease you at a swap, but only Bobby.
Bobby can take it, huh, Colleen?
We hope.
Really
I think people, it's a way to get rid of stress. So it's a different cultural thing, I think.
Well,
But some
we'll
people
be.
don't get it, so you don't tease them.
Linda, this is John. Yeah, I just wanted to say a minute or two about what Terry's story about his uncle made me think. I mean, the powerful thing about storytelling, first of all, it's just the story itself, but then it'll make you think of things in your, especially if it's a personal story, it'll make you think of things that may have happened to you. And so it did make me think about my dad's older brother, my Uncle Al, who was not too far from northern Indiana, but in Chicago. And sometimes I think there's a certain sense of humor that may float with certain regions. And I remember my cousin telling me about, you know, some of his friends that, you know, I go visit and they'd crack me up, and he said, oh, well, the stuff on, you know, some of the people on Saturday Night Live and others that were from Chicago or that area were so popular. And he said, oh, those are just exactly like all my friends, or something like that. And I remember him saying that. But anyway, one little aside I wanted to say about my Uncle Al, when I was maybe, I don't even know how old, maybe 6 or 7, and as little kids sometimes will maybe say the wrong thing about being too curious about things, and where you probably shouldn't say it, but you do. And so my Uncle Al had, you know, the classic hair on both sides above his ears, but then like completely bald on top. And I just happened to throw out, I said, well, Uncle Al, how did you lose your hair? And he'd already mentioned something, I think, before, but then I knew he had been in the army and some heavy fighting in Sicily in World War II. And he said, well, I was there, and we were fighting, and we were in combat, and I couldn't see what was going on, and I put my head up, and they shot it off. And so they shot his hair off. And so that's how and that was his explanation. And I probably at first bought it, but then later on, knowing what kind of a sense of humor he had, what a joker he was, I said, oh, it's not true, but I still love the fact that he threw it in. And it was a good memory.
Makes me wonder if it's generic to uncles, John, in general, that uncles are like that they just have a tendency to be sort of, sort of in the Bill Lepp world, and they love to take young men, impressionable men, and ply them with all kinds of tales. I look forward to telling you some more Uncle Neil stories when I see you come to the next swaps.
Wow. Bill Lepp. Oh gosh, how many national liars contests has Bill Lepp won? More than 4, at least 4. It reminds me, Terry, bringing up other tellers, that I could put a plug in for the Wednesday, the genre telling that's coming up this Wednesday. February 17 is genre telling, and I think it's at 7 p.m. And that would be on the SAC website.
Right.
Does anyone remember romance? I
Yeah.
don't remember the theme. Is it romance?
Yes, it is.
Yes, for February.
Mm-hmm. And I want to put a plug in for late February Thursday, the last Thursday or the fourth Thursday in Feb will be the Orinda swap. Where do you all remember who's coming?
Oh, yes.
Oregano? Yeah, Henniger, Steve Henniger.
Yes.
Yeah, he's great.
He did didn't he do the Santa Rosa swap for a long time?
Maybe.
I think he did.
When he left the Oakland Bay Area, I
Yeah.
thought that he moved north, but maybe he
He
moved.
didn't do that? Okay.
Well, he might have. That is north of here.
Yes.
I think he did with Elaine. And then he went on up further.
It'll
His
be
wife,
yeah.
his wife had some big job up there, so he went with her.
Right. What a style he has.
I'm sorry. Terry and I have got to leave.
Ah,
But we've had a wonderful, wonderful time, and I've got a story for next month.
oh, great, Anne.
Good.
You're both welcome.
And
To
thank
March.
you, Terry, for remembering my Uncle Lou. Probably ruined me for Berkeley, but that's all right. I'm still happy.
No, this is great. Terry, you spawned Colleen's story and John's story.
Oh my God.
And Bobby, to some extent.
Is a problem of mine.
Well, thank you again to Anne and Terry. And now you're making me wonder if I can talk Vicky into telling an uncle story. For all I know, Vicky, you had not one uncle, but.
Take care, guys. I love you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I think I'd rather wait till next time if that's
Fair
okay.
enough. Fair enough. Well, if you would like me to release all of you, it's nice having you in our big room here, but I will release you.
Okay, thank you.
What are we going to do about our Rainu?
Give it to you.
Because, oh, good, there it is. So is it easy to copy? Can I just copy Rainu's info into my clipboard, and then once I close the meeting, will it be in my clipboard? Do you know?
You can save the chat to your desktop, right?
Hmm.
See that where it says file, everyone file, just click save chat. And it'll save it on your
You can just
desktop.
take a screenshot. Actually, you can just take a screenshot of the chat.
I have two.
And I will also send it to you, Linda, via email.
Oh, Rainu, if you have time and you email me that, it would be great.
Yes, I will do that right away.
Everyone publicly and privately, everyone publicly. But that
Yeah,
doesn't, save chat.
I'll put it on the group email.
Yeah, it's saved to my desktop, but who knows?
How will, when I get off the Zoom and I go to my desktop, is it just going to be on my desktop?
Somewhere, document, downloads, somewhere.
You can go to your Finder and find it.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Where would we be without finders?
But I have an Apple, so I don't know if it works on other computers.
My desktop's an Apple. My other stuff is.
It should. You should.
Android.
Because I couldn't find. I did it one time. But if I went to find her, I found it.
Okay, I have to
Well,
go and love everybody. Good
thank you,
stories.
Bobby.
Very good
Thank you,
stories.
Bobby. Oh my
Yep.
gosh, it was a great
Alrighty,
night.
bye-bye.
I feel the same way about all of us, whether we told or not. So, good night to the February mixed bag.
All
Till
right.
next month. I'm so glad you found us, Renu.
Yeah, I'm very happy too. Lovely meeting all of you, and I enjoyed the story. So thank you so much, Linda, for sending me the link. And I will try. I will be back in March. That's if you want me back.
You're on my list now. You'll have to ask me to take you off.
Renu is like my grandmother ruled the household. So she was, since my grandfather died, she was the one that ruled everybody in the family. She was the matriarch. And a lot of foreign families are that way, at least in the Midwest, they used to be. So it wasn't like, I just wanted to get your feminism in there. So that's why I was.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you.
Colleen, you remind me about one thing for Renu. When you were thinking about prompting us different, the dolls were different, but they looked the same, but they were different. And until you got into the wires and to the part of the story, I was thinking, oh, maybe it's just something sort of shallow, like, not that I would accuse you of that, something like they're different because I was picturing Russian nesting dolls and they were different because of size, but that would have been obvious to all of them. But it's so insightful that it would be so challenging. The theme of your tale was challenge, and this was common sense, but buried under layers, or, under hair of an ear. Anyway, what a great night. I enjoyed it so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, and thank you for
You're
everybody for.
welcome. You're welcome. Good night, you all. And John, good night to Eileen, too.
Good
Okay,
night.
thanks, Linda. Nice to be part of it. Good night.
Good night. Good night. I'm
Bye.
ending our meeting now.
Okay. All right.
Oh, I
Thanks
wonder
for the
if I
invite.
have to stop.